Hello everybody, welcome today to a slightly different and I think somewhat philosophical video that I'm going to call the Ferrari Paradox. And this has been directly inspired by one specific individual in the comment section who has taken it upon themselves to time just how long it takes in a video before I mention the fact that I own 3 Ferraris. And they have bet me that I cannot go longer than 3 minutes without admitting to the fact. So then, what exactly is the Ferrari Paradox? Well, it's actually a series of somewhat interconnected mini paradoxes forming a greater whole, and today I'm going to walk you through them in no particular order beyond that in which they pop into my mind. I'm also trying to achieve a couple of other things today. First off, this car hasn't actually been driven in about 6 weeks, and it is long overdue an expedition. I've also just cleaned it, and I cannot be bothered to properly dry it, nor, as is evident, properly clean it. I am also testing a new piece of equipment, a Rode Wireless Pro microphone. Now, I've actually used these a few times in the past because my buddy Anthony uses them for his channel Sports and Touring and our joint channel JAYEMM Friends. But the good people at Rode got in touch the other day and said, would I like to have one for myself? And I said, yes, please. So today I am using that in place of my regular Sennheiser setup, and for those who care about these things, I would invite you all to comment down below whether you think the audio quality today is better, worse, or no different to normal. Right then, let's get on to it, shall we, and begin with, I think, the fundamental issue behind Ferraris, and that is, are they actually desirable or not? Now, I will freely admit that as a child of, technically speaking, the late 80s, but practically the 1990s, I think I'm one of the last of that generation that really did judge people based on the car that they drove. Back then, you still had company car schemes, and there was still this holdover of the car you drove dictated your position in the company, ergo your position in society. If you haven't seen it, I highly recommend the somewhat legendary and, yes I know, not entirely truthful, but still brilliant From A to B Tales of Modern Motoring, a program from the very early 1990s, I think only about 5 episodes worth, and the episode in question I'm talking about is one where they discuss company car drivers, and honestly, if you've seen it before, you know what I'm talking about. I'll put a link to it in the description down below, because if you haven't seen that, consider it my gift to you. And the other episode of television, which I think is also one of the all-time greats, is the Grand Tour's Funeral for a Ford. A really properly brilliant episode of television that I think ranks as one of the best of not just the Grand Tour, but also Top Gear as well. And in that, the classic trio of Clarkson, Hammond and May talk you through what exactly each car meant to them when their dad turned up with it. And for 2 of them, it went very well indeed. Not so much the other. I am deliberately very cagey on this channel about talking about the things that my family have or haven't had over the years. In brief, Dad and Mum, when they were still together, did do very well, increasingly so. When I was born, we didn't really have all that much at all, and Dad had just started a business the year before I arrived, and so they didn't really have very much money for anything remotely frivolous. However, as time went on and things improved for them both, the cars got eventually a little bit nicer, so the Fords and Vauxhalls were replaced with BMWs and Mercs, though the latter they certainly regretted, and then eventually the likes of Ferraris and Porsches appeared. In the case of my dad, he actually bought a Ferrari long before he bought a Porsche. He has the yellow 355 that you may have seen on the channel before, and I'm not sure I've actually ever admitted on the channel that that belonged to my dad. I think in the video I said it was a close family member, which is true from a certain point of view, but early in the channel I was really concerned that if people found out that my dad had nice cars, they would assume that he bought all of mine. And hopefully things have gotten to the stage now where you'll believe me when I say, no, I earned this. And there'll of course be plenty of people out there keen to say, well, actually, James, the F12 is on finance, isn't it? So it's not really yours, it belongs to the bank. And you know what, if you want to say it like that, be like that, I'm really genuinely not bothered at all. The 550 though is all mine, and in case for whatever reason you are brand new to this channel, the third Ferrari that I have, yeah, I do have to mention it, don't I? In this video particularly, is a 430 Scuderia, which also belongs mostly to the bank and partly to me. A lovely trio, and I've had that set up now for a couple of years. And if you want to know more about any specific car, I'll put some links in the description down below, or just search JAYEMM Ferrari. I've been lucky to drive quite a few of them. Anyway, as a kid, to me, if you'd done really well, you bought yourself a Porsche. And if you'd done exceptionally well, you bought a Ferrari. Now, as it happens, when Dad bought his first Ferrari, a 328, this was back in the days when an older Ferrari was a cheaper Ferrari, and I think he had at the time a 328 and an M3, and the M3 was the more expensive car. As it turned out, our neighbour also had an old car, which I later found out was an Aston Martin DB5, and back then, Dad was the flash git for having the Ferrari and the M3, and Kerry over the road just sort of made do with his DB5, though likely I am exaggerating that somewhat. They were never especially cheap cars, and certainly not cheap to run. But point I want to make here is that for me, a Ferrari was the pinnacle. It was the thing that you bought. It was the most desirable car. The only brands, as far as I'm concerned, that have ever come even close to replicating that general desirability are Lamborghini, which has, I think, even more flamboyance than Ferrari, and Rolls-Royce, which has, I would say, at least the same brand appeal as Ferrari, but in a very, very different way. So then, for me, I spent a very, very long time with the idea that the reason you went to work and the reason you put the hours and the effort in is because one day there would be a Ferrari on the driveway. And I've done plenty of videos talking on exactly how I managed to make that happen, but let's just skip over that and get to the stage where, well, now there is not just one, but luckily enough, 3. Although I should point out at this point in time, being fair, balanced, honest and all that, that in the 2 years that I have been lucky enough to call myself a triple Ferrari owner, I think they've only spent about 2 or 3 weeks in each other's company. The rest of the time, at least one of them has been in the workshop, and in fact currently only one of them, this one, is actually working. Although I think there are still a few issues with it, because the temperature gauge was malfunctioning, a couple of the little bits of leather need tending to, but these are all minor things. The Scuderia is actually in fairly fine fettle. I'm just getting the headlights and some other cosmetics sorted, and the 550, the 550 has gained the dubious honour of being the first of my Ferraris to actually let me down properly and fail to proceed. That'll be its own video. That it has to be, as is the nature of Ferraris. When they break, they don't tend to do it cheaply. Now, I'm very lucky in that I did actually get to drive a few Ferraris before I became an owner of one. I also drove a few different Porsches, an Audi R8 and various other things. But the thing that kept me going was the notion that Ferrari equaled success. And though I know this may sound like an absolutely awful, terrible thing to admit, that you buy a Ferrari because you want one, because that is a badge that you've somehow succeeded, I think it's also really, really important to be honest about that thing. And I'm pretty sure that most people that bought a flashy car, they only did so because when they were younger, there was somebody they really looked up to that had one, or maybe it appeared in a movie that they were really, really smitten with. And I do relish taking every opportunity given to me to remind people that the only reason my friend Anthony is even remotely interested in 911s is because of the rather oddball 80s action movie Condor Man. But that being said, I did also want to make sure that I was the sort of person that never bought a Ferrari just to say they had a Ferrari. I wanted to make sure that I bought one that I really, really wanted. This is how I arrived with the 550, and I talked about this a lot in the recent video of it. But And here is where the paradoxes begin. I apologize, it's taken a little while longer to get here than I anticipated, but I'm having quite a good time, and I hope you are too. If you are, make sure to hit the like button, and if you haven't already, hit subscribe too. It does make a really big difference and makes stuff like this happen. Anyway, the 550, big moment that. In fact, the first time I ever drove one was just after I had bought it, and it turned out to be a genuinely brilliant car. And that wasn't an easy thing for the 550 to achieve, because it, in some ways, very indirectly, but it replaced the Lotus Evora 400 that I began this channel with. And tricky so-and-sos though a Lotus may be to own, they are brilliant to drive. And by the time I got to the stage of being a Ferrari owner, I wanted a car that if I was going to spend that much money on it, I was going to enjoy driving. And the 550 I do, and in fact the majority of Ferraris I do. And I know a lot of people will have a go at them, saying they're not the best or they're overrated in some way, shape or form, but I'm sorry, for me they really are that good to drive. A lot of people, when I talk about this, say, why don't you just buy an LC500, it'll be a lot easier to maintain. And I get it, yeah, it will be a lot easier to maintain. The interior is also beautiful, much better put together, it works really well, and an LC500 is a fantastic thing, but it is an entirely, completely different experience to something like the F12. And that's not to say the Lexus is worse. The Lexus is like, well, it was effectively a third of the price when it was new, and today, more or less the same is still true. So it's not going to be the same, is it? I like them both. It's not a case of one being better or worse. They're just different. But this is, I think, a little bit more special, partly because it's rare, etc, etc. I drive a lot of 911s, and one of the reasons that I haven't bought another one of those is because they are, well, fairly common, and if you don't speak 911, they do all look the same, don't they? You're not, though, very likely to mistake this for a 360. What a machine. That is one of the all-time great engines. But I'm so sorry, I'm meandering so much. Paradoxes, James. There are people out there that will tell you that these aren't great cars, that they are rubbish, that they are overrated. Now, I wager a lot of people that say that haven't driven one. Or they're making a comparison that is somewhat unfair. They're comparing a much older Ferrari with a much newer something else. Or, worst of all, a modified something or other else. The number of people that I know who say, oh, well, those Ferraris are useless and they're horrible because, you know, my modified Supra or Skyline is quicker than a 355. Insert Fast and Furious joke here. But that kind of defeats the point. That really misses what these cars are all about. Yes, speed is a very big part of a Ferrari. Yes, they're always harping on about their racing heritage, even though I think a bit like Lotus, maybe when you haven't won a championship for 20 years, you probably shouldn't talk about it too much. But the simple fact is, you just sit into any number of Ferraris and they make you feel special before you've even turned the key. They are an event. And when you're talking about cars like this, performance, it's just one teeny weeny aspect of the whole experience. One of the reasons that many years ago I, perhaps foolishly, didn't buy an R34 GTR when they were still 35 grand is because inside they are cheap old Japanese car, and I knew that even at a time like this, you know, in the middle of the morning on a weekday, you don't always get the road to yourself, and you certainly can't drive as fast as you like. The reality is that for the most part you're going to be driving along at 5 or 6 tenths, and in that case you want a car that makes you feel good when you're going 5 or 6 tenths, and not all cars do. These do though, and my Lotus did. Porsches often do, 911s often do, but there are plenty of other cars I've driven where when you're not absolutely hammering them, they just don't feel that great. I'm going to be controversial here and say Honda NSX. The old one, actually, I much prefer the new one, and I know that makes me weird and strange, but hey, it's true. There are people out there who think I say things just to be controversial, but I just say them because I believe them. That is a hard thing for many people to accept, I know. But what to me makes this so paradoxical is that the same people who spend so long bashing Ferraris and telling people how useless, rubbish, slow, unreliable, overpriced they are also the people that are generally really keen to tell you that their modified Corvette is better, faster, so on and so forth. And to me, if a Ferrari is such a low benchmark, if it's such a poor performer, if it's so overpriced to begin with, why are you trying to impress me by telling me that your car is better? I mean, I don't get it. If you don't like Ferraris, that's absolutely fine, but to me, you really do need to have driven one to fully get what they're all about. And I totally understand and get that car people come in all shapes and guises. And for car people, there will be a whole host of different things that make a car great or not. Particularly for my friends across the pond, there will be plenty of people for whom the quarter-mile time is everything. If your car is quick down the drag strip, it's a great car, full stop, end of discussion. And you know what? Most European manufacturers don't really care about that sort of thing. Other than McLaren, they seem to have developed a fondness for it, but that's probably because their cars are good on a drag strip. Oh, this is so good. I also have to say I do feel a little bit sorry for Ferrari because I've watched them grow over the years, of course, and they have changed quite a bit as a company. I would be the first to say that I don't think they've always changed for the better. I kind of preferred the Demonte era where numbers were somewhat more limited and there were fewer models. And to me, this is when they made some of their best ever cars. The 355, still my all-time dream purchase, and yes, I know I haven't bought one, I could have, I've done videos on why. The 550, which I have bought, the 456, which I have driven and enjoyed and will be revisiting soon, and of course, the mighty F50. And in 1997, what I've just described there, the 355, 456, 550 and F50, that was the entirety of the Ferrari lineup. Now you have the Puro Sangue, you've got the recently announced 12 Cilindri, the 12-cylinder, the new V12, you have the 296, both those cars are available either as a coupe or a Spider, you have the Roma, you've got the Roma Spider, and you've got, well, there was the Daytona SP3, I suppose they're probably still making that, and it gets to the point where I'm sure I've probably forgotten a model as well. They make a lot of different cars now. This, I think, is in part to disguise the fact they're making more cars overall, so by spreading it across a greater number of model lines, they'll still maintain that sort of semblance of rarity. And truth be told, Ferrari as a company only make now something like half as many cars as Porsche do 911s every year. They're still fairly rare, but nowhere near as rare as they once were. Another issue that often comes with Ferraris is the reputation of the owners, who are often viewed as aloof, somewhat unsympathetic individuals that have plenty of money and are very, very keen to remind you of that fact. And this is particularly unfortunate and the source of yet another paradox, because I know quite a few people that easily have enough money to buy a Ferrari, but they don't want to because they are worried about other Ferrari owners. When in fact the truth is that, yeah, actually I've been to a few events where the people you talk to are actually, well, they're dicks. But I've been to far more events where the people you talk to, the Ferrari owners, they're really quite nice and lovely. And I think really the easiest way to spot one if you want to go and talk to a Ferrari owner is just about anybody driving an older one. The fact is, the modern models now have become so unbelievably expensive. I think they are starting to attract a slightly different crowd, and that's unfortunate. I know a lot of people have asked me recently of my opinion on the new 12-cylinder, and I'll probably do a separate video on that, but I can't afford it anyway, so my opinion is ultimately meaningless. And another paradox for you, I am beginning to get into them now, is for me as a YouTuber, I get a lot of comments from people saying I don't feature enough affordable cars. I just do supercars, Lamborghinis, Ferraris, Porsches, that sort of thing. But actually, the truth is, I always have done a great variety of stuff. It's just that now I make Ferrari content regularly, I can tell that that's what a lot of people click on. Yeah, I'm told I don't make enough cheap car videos. The reality is I do, it's just they're rarely anywhere near as popular. Go figure. In fact, I'll let you into a little trade secret here, but videos on Ferraris do quite well, not just in terms of overall numbers, but also the money that you earn, because Ferrari is a luxury brand, Google knows this, and therefore you get paid more per view. This is one of the reasons that some people like to stick with just luxury brand stuff, because it pays better. Do a 100,000 view video on a Ferrari, it will earn you more than a 100,000 view video on a Ford. This is no shock at all to many people I know, but for some watching, it might be something you are unaware of. But back to my previous point, I assure you, a great many people that have Ferraris are just regular, ordinary people that maybe got a little bit lucky in life, or perhaps you could also call it unlucky. Somebody passed away, they were left some money, and I'm sure they'd rather have that person still, but, well, unfortunately, we can't make that choice, and so instead they go, okay, all right, that's fine, I've got the house, I've got the basics that I need, I'm going to have fun, and I'll buy a Ferrari. And in my recent video where I talked about one of the reasons I really love Ferraris, you'll see that actually now the market has gone all squiffy, where before, if you bought a Ferrari, that involved spending a lot more money than on a Porsche. But today, that's not really necessarily true at all. Buying a 911 GT3 of most eras would involve parting with enough money to get you into a decent Ferrari of many eras. Let me give you a concrete example. If you were looking at, say, a 991.2, that's the previous generation 911 GT3, particularly one with a manual, you would be spending enough money to get you into this. And that's one of the reasons that I don't have a 911 GT3 and I do have an F12. I was also discussing earlier about the Montezemolo era, and I started a point that I know I didn't finish. What was I discussing? Well, it's the fact that a lot of people like to point out that the cars of that era did reuse a number of parts from other manufacturers. And the truth is that every low-volume manufacturer did that, and to some extent most of them still do that. Case in point, the window switches in my Aston Martins are from Volvos, the stalks are probably from a Ford. My Lotus Evora had the key from a Ford, the stalks from a Ford. The Lotus Exige, even when they were charging £100,000 for the thing, had the stalks from a 25-year-old Vauxhall. And this is simply a necessity for low-volume manufacturers. I know it might sound daft, but to build your own indicator stalk, it's a really big thing. And generally speaking, if they've used the indicator stalk from a manufacturer, it's probably because they've used a whole steering column and a bunch of other parts. And these are generally decent, good parts that are not inherently bad. More to the point, when the car is then 30 years old, and things break because they do on 30-year-old cars, you'll find yourself, if you own one, actually praying that the bit that broke is off an old Ford, because that means you'll be able to get it, and it's cheap. But as customers became more sophisticated and Ferrari started to try and sell more cars, they did have to start to address some of these things, and so they had to start doing more stuff themselves. And this means building their own infotainment systems. They of course got rid of stalks entirely and put all the switches on the wheel, which actually I quite like. The first couple of days with a car like this, you just spend a lot of time swearing at it. And then the third day, you go back to a regular car and you start to think, why doesn't everybody do it this way? Because it makes a lot of sense. But of course, a company like Ferrari, they're still not making masses of cars, and so to offset the cost of developing these systems, well, they have to reuse it quite a few times. And then you get people complaining, oh, they've gone and put the same interior in the 458 and the F12. Like that's really a big issue. They're not identical, but they're nearly the same. The fact is, both of them are really nice. You don't want them to buy off-the-shelf, nice, easy to reuse or update components. You want them to build their own, but you don't want to give them the time and the sales to be able to offset the cost. Another paradox for you. I'm on a roll now, let me give you another one. And this actually is not Ferrari specific at all. Instead, it applies to all performance cars. Yes, they are ludicrously powerful, but the fact is the 550, which in Ferrari terms is this car's, I think, great-grandfather, well, that's already got more than enough power, just shy of 500 horses, to get you in serious trouble on the public roads in Britain. This has then another 250 horsepower on top, which it certainly doesn't need. In fact, the speed limits across the board have gotten lower over the years. Traffic has become a lot worse, and you'll always get people that say, oh, well, you can't really use that power, can you? Well, you can, just in short bursts. Track days are also a thing where you definitely can use the power, but the fact is, just because you've got the power doesn't mean you have to use it. And I enjoy the technical side of the car. I enjoy knowing what it is capable of, knowing that I also won't probably use it the vast majority of the time. And this leads me, I think perhaps neatly, and maybe I suppose I should really wrap things up, onto the core of the Ferrari paradox. And this is something very, very British at heart. It is the fact that, yes, we have established I have 3 Ferraris, but anybody and everybody who knows me and knows me outside of YouTube will also know that if we're in any kind of social situation and the topic of cars comes up with people that I don't know, I will do anything and everything to get out of mentioning that I have 3 Ferraris. Because people are weird. British people, doubly so. You say you've got 3 nice cars, in fact you say you've got any nice car, and people can be a bit cagey, they can be a bit strange about the whole thing. Suddenly they've decided that they don't really like you, and that's unfortunate. I think somebody told me in Australia they have a phrase for this. They call it tall poppy syndrome, and it's very apt, and not something unique to the car space for sure. It appears in all walks of life, but it is frustrating. And in fact, one of the other paradoxes I often encounter is there are lots of people I know that don't have, you know, silly supercar money. They can't spend £500,000 on something, but they can spend 30 to 40 grand on something, which I think is a fairly attainable number for a car. And I'm sure some people have just gone, oh, that's loads and loads of money for a car. And yes, I know, look, 40 grand is a lot of money. I'm not going to pretend it isn't. But in this day and age, 40 grand in terms of new cars, that'll get you a nice Kia Sportage. Not the top of the line one. It'll get you a modestly specified Golf GTI, not even a well specified Golf GTI. It certainly won't get you into a decent Golf R anymore. And there's a load of other stuff that really should be 40 grand, but it isn't. You can, however, pick yourself up, say an Aston Martin DB9, a V8 Vantage. You could get a Lotus Evora, or even an Audi R8. But there are a lot of people I know that if they turn up to a customer's house in one of those, they're going to be greeted with, oh, I must be paying you too much money. The Americans, I think, have got it a little more right here, because over there, if you need a tradesperson of any description, they'll say, yeah, who's that guy that does the swimming pools that's got the 8 Lamborghinis? He must be really good. Here, I think people would much rather a tradesperson turn up in a clapped-out old Peugeot 206 than a Porsche, because apparently people shouldn't be paid for their efforts. People shouldn't be able to enjoy their success. And the paradox, of course, being that if someone were to turn up in a £60,000 Golf R, nobody would mention anything. But turn up in a £30,000 Aston Martin, and you'll get, oh, we're paying you too much, aren't we? Stupid, daft, moronic, and to be honest, I think more than a little bit selfish. I don't look at people with horses and go, oh crikey, how do you afford one of those? And yet everybody I know that owns cars and horses will tell you, the one with the heartbeat, that's the expensive one. And so, what is it exactly that I'm trying to say? Well, here's what it is, because when this individual started commenting, I did start thinking about what they had to say, because if I were in a social situation and somebody made a point very early on of saying, oh, I've got 3 Ferraris, don't you know, I'd probably think they were a little bit of a knob as well. I would. But we're not. in a social situation. This is a car channel. You've clicked on this because you want to know about cars, and there's a good chance if you've been watching this channel for a while, you already know the cars that I do have. So hopefully when I say that I've got such and such, it isn't too much of a surprise if you've been watching. And if it is, I'm sorry, you may have missed a video. It's honestly difficult for me to keep up sometimes with what exactly is or isn't on the driveway. Add in then the nature of filming and releasing videos, and things get very, very complicated very, very quickly. But the reason I like talking about these cars, the reason I like discussing them all the time and making videos at every given opportunity is because, you know what? I love talking about cars. I love the machinery. And the reason I want to show stuff off, the reason I want to talk to you about my F12 is not to tell you that I've got an F12. It's to show you the cool car. It's the interesting thing. It's the exciting car. And there's a few people that I'm lucky enough to have got to know over the years that feel the same way. They found themselves in a situation where they are able to afford some fairly nice things, and they like sharing them, they like enjoying them. My whole channel, everything I have now, is built upon the kindness and the goodness of people sharing their cars. If they didn't, I wouldn't have this. And I feel it's my sort of responsibility to then share this the one and only way that I know how, which is by making videos on it and every now and again taking it to a show, taking people out for a ride in it, enjoying the car, making sure it is driven. After all, that's maybe the worst Ferrari paradox of them all, isn't it? That they build these wonderful, amazing, brilliant cars, and then people don't drive them. And I never want to be that person. Not ever. I don't think I've really probably said in a lot of ways the things that I set out to, but hopefully you have enjoyed today's video. And either way, I would love you to head into the comment section now and discuss how you feel about some of the topics raised, and whether you think I'm right, wrong, or simply just telling you again that I have Ferraris. It's very nice, and one day it might not be the case, but who wants to be that person that gets to the end and says, you know, shouldn't have spent so much time driving my Ferrari? That'd be sad, wouldn't it? Anyway, it's a glorious day and I'm in a lovely car, so I'm a very, very happy man and grateful as ever to you for watching. Don't forget to hit the like button, comment down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and I shall see you for the next one. Bye bye.